Can a single phrase change the course of a team like Ferrari? What said Charles Leclerc that left Lewis Hamilton without words and unleashed an internal storm in Maranello? Today I reveal the hidden story behind the shocking message that Hamilton directed to Leclerc after the 2025 Belgium GP, and why it could be the break point in the Ferrari season. The 2025 Belgium Grand Prix was not any appointment in the calendar, it was the exact point where Ferrari had deposited all his technical hopes to save a season that began to show his structural cracks. In the previous days, the atmosphere in Maranello was loaded with an unusual mixture of optimism and anxiety. There was talk with enthusiasm contained in an important update. A new geometry in the rear suspension of the SF25, refined to the last detail for countless hours in the wind tunnel and validated in a private test in Mugello. In theory, this update was aimed at improving aerodynamic stability and minimizing car sensitivity to height changes, a defect that had conditioned the performance of the SF25 in circuits with potholes or rapid curves. The change was not less. Technically, Ferrari repositioned the upper arm of the triangle of the lowest and further suspension, adjusted the fairings that cover the suspension arms, and modified key parameters in the rear structural assembly. The result they were looking for was that the car could maintain a more stable platform in braking and in a curve, which would not only facilitate piloting, but would open margin to refine the setup on complicated weekends. It was, in short, a technical step with direct implications in the pilot's confidence. Everything pointed to Belgium would mark a before and after for Ferrari. However, the reality was devastating. After the race, in front of the international press, Charles Leclerc released a phrase that, although formulated with serenity, worked like a direct poison dart to Maranello's heart. "I have not felt a big difference." It was not a criticism on or an emotional download. It was a surgical sentence, brutally honest, pronounced with the naturalness of who has already lost faith in promises that are repeated every year. And that coldness was precisely what hurt. Because it was not an impulsive reaction to the heat of the moment, but of a rational, thoughtful evaluation, which dismantled all the optimistic narrative built by the technical team. Within Ferrari's garage, the effect was immediate. The silence seized the environment. The engineers avoided visual contact, the mechanics worked with an unusual tension, and the team managers knew that this phrase, launched in the worst possible time, would echo in the media, in the forums, and above all, in the mind of Lewis Hamilton. For Hamilton, who had been dragging frustrations for a series of unproductive weekends, listening to that of his partner not only proved him right, but confirmed something he feared since the preseason tests, that the car did not have the promised level and that the technical project was still far from being under control. The great irony was that, while Leclerc climbed to the podium, the entire team descended chemically. It was a result that in other circumstances would have meant a step forward, but that became a painful reminder that not even a good result can make up the structural lacks of a misunderstood car. Because in Formula One, more than specific results, which defines the strength of a project is the correlation between what is designed, what is tested, and what is finally perceived on the track. And in Belgium, that correlation failed loudly. If this episode made something clear, it is that Ferrari is not just fighting his rivals on the track. He is struggling, above all, against his own expectations, against a story that always weighs more than the present, and against an internal model that still fails to translate talent into consistent results. Leclerc's phrase, as short as devastating, was the spark that ignited that uncomfortable truth. And Hamilton, with his initial silence and his subsequent private reflection, perfectly understood that Belgium was not a technical turning point, but emotional. From the first moment his arrival in Ferrari was announced, Lewis Hamilton ceased to be simply a Formula One pilot to become an institutional statement. His signing was not just a sports bet, it was a symbolic maneuver that sought to shake Maranello's internal culture. With 7 world titles and more than a decade at the head of the most dominant team of the hybrid era, its arrival represented, at least on paper, the beginning of a new era. But if something made clear the 2025 Belgium GP is that not even a living legend can change a structure without before confronting it. In the paddock, the Hamilton A Ferrari effect caused extreme reactions from the beginning. Euphoria in the tifosi, media pressure in engineers, and internal skepticism in some sectors of the team. It is not that they doubted their talent, but that they feared that their demand forged in the Mercedes methodical ecosystem will collide frontally with the much more artisanal and emotionally loaded processes that characterize Ferrari. Belgium was the culmination of that underground tension. Hamilton, who had worked hard to adapt to SF25, even changing his braking style and middle curve to approach Leclerc's, faced the cruel irony of seeing how all those adjustments did not lead to any tangible progress. For the British, the frustration was double. First, because he understood that it was not enough to adapt to the car, he also had to change the mentality of the team. And second, because the alleged qualitative technical leap, that suspension package that should transform the SF25, did not generate any real improvement. Leclerc confirmed it with his statement. And although the press focused on the phrase of Monegasco, the truly significant thing was what came later, the message that Hamilton transmitted to the inside team. Unlike other moments of his career, this time there was no public criticism or a press conference full of indirects. Instead, there was a direct intervention in later technical meetings. Hamilton, with a contained but firm tone, expressed his concern for disconnection between simulation data and the real behavior of the car. He pointed out the lack of correlation as a systemic problem that should be addressed not with aerodynamic patches, but with a total review of the development approach. In other words, he did not ask for new pieces. He asked for a new philosophy. This attitude marked a turning point, because until then Hamilton had acted as another pilot inside Ferrari. But from Belgium he began to assume a more proactive role, almost like an alternate technical director, questioning not only the proposed solutions, but the conceptual framework from which they were generated. For many within the team, it was an awkward moment. But it was also the first in which someone with real authority verbalized what some already thought in silence: that Ferrari not only needs speed but also direction. Belgium, in that sense, was much more than a technical disappointment. It was the confirmation that Hamilton is no longer a guest at Ferrari. He is a key actor, willing to tighten the necessary ropes for the most legendary motoring team to be up to the history. Not with speeches, but with uncomfortable questions, raw truths, and an ambition that does not understand diplomacy. And in that new context, Leclerc ceased to be simply his teammate. It became the first mirror where Hamilton saw the urgency of transforming Maranello from his foundations reflected. The fracture signals within the team began to make visible even before the Leclerc declaration. In the days before the GP, it had already been rumored that several engineers internally questioned the reliability of simulations, especially with regard to track height conditions and oscillations in high-speed curves. But it was not until the Belgian weekend that distrust materialized in the form of statements, awkward silences, and elusive looks in the paddock. Leclerc's message was the detonation. Hamilton's reaction, the validation of a collective sensation. Ferrari's current model is not enough. But this is not just a technical conflict. It is also a leadership dispute. Charles Leclerc, a pilot formed at the Ferrari Academy and considered the cornerstone of the project since 2019, has been the internal voice that articulates the pilot's needs within the framework of the possible. With the arrival of Hamilton, that voice is contrasted by another much more incisive, less willing to negotiate with the limitations of the present. The result is a team that seems not to know who to listen to, trapped between the prudence of his past and the demand of a pilot who does not accept excuses. Spa was a turning point not because of the results but because of the conflict he presented. For the first time in a long time, Ferrari not only needs to evolve the car, he needs to redefine itself as an organization. And on that way Hamilton will not be a passenger. It will be the engine of that transformation. But for that engine to work, the rest of the team must decide whether it is willing to turn it on, or to continue clinging to an idea of Ferrari that is no longer enough to win championships. Because in Formula One, the titles are not achieved only with talent. They are built from cohesion. And today that is precisely what the Scuderia most lacks. Ferrari has lived countless cycles of hope and frustration, but what was lived in the 2025 Belgium GP goes beyond the typical technical stumbling. It was a moment of internal revelation that forced everyone from track engineers to the directive dome in Maranello to reassess their own narrative. Because when a team of this magnitude, with unlimited resources and an unmatched legacy, is reduced to seeking comfort in the rhetoric of, "we are improving," the problem is no longer the car. And it is in the middle of that crossroads that Lewis Hamilton appears as a key figure. Not for his titles. Not because of its popularity. His message was not an attack on Leclerc or a criticism of the team for the sport. It was a warning full of experience. There is no time to lose. The British did not sign with Ferrari to be a symbolic pilot. He signed to win. And winning, at this stage of his career, it is no longer just a personal goal. It is a declaration of principles. Leclerc also has a fundamental role. His sensitivity to the car, his connection with the technicians and their innate talent remain fundamental pillars. But you must decide if you want to lead from comfort or join a more awkward but more effective evolution process. It is not a duel between pilots. This is if Ferrari can have two leaders who build together, even if they think differently. Because true transformation is not achieved by eliminating tensions. It is achieved by channeling them towards a common direction. And now the question, I leave it to you. What should Ferrari do from this point? Give Hamilton the control of technical development? Reformulate its internal structure? Reaffirm Leclerc as project leader? Or maybe look for a fusion between both visions? Leave it in the comments.